Welcome back, TechBridge Nation. Now, is that the way to get a party started or what? So we did our early bird special. For those of you who joined Chris Spiker at 8:30, thank you so much for joining. I'm Don Webster. I'm the Executive Director of TechBridge. We're so grateful that you joined us at the Entrepreneurship Institute Conference that's virtual. We've got an empty theater but a full house today, and we are really excited. So please let me introduce you to our keynote speaker for this morning. His name is Chris Hackett, and Chris is the managing partner of OneSource Family Office. You can read his bio on our landing page. You got to see the bottom. But from my perspective, Chris has been a paperboy, a short order cook, a PIAA wrestling official, former candidate for Congress, triathlete, business owner, business investor, and active community volunteer. When TechBridge talks about why not us, why not here, why not now, Chris Hackett lives that every day. So how about we listen to Chris Hackett with startups, investors, and being all in. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Don. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your crowd. It is interesting looking out at empty seats. I feel like a basketball player playing in front of an empty arena. But so let's talk about our goal for today. Our goal is why can we do this here? Why is northeastern Pennsylvania such a great spot for startup businesses? And there's a saying in politics that money is the mother's milk of politics, and without money, you can't be a successful candidate. If that's true, then money is the stem cells of building a successful business. It is the basic building block. It is something that's required of everyone to successfully develop and maximize the value of an idea or an innovation. The main reason that businesses are unsuccessful is they run out of capital. They run out of money. And so today what I want to try and do is convey the importance and also the process by which you can fund your startup or your idea. So one of the advantages that I have is I have kind of walked in both sets of shoes of an entrepreneur as well as an investor. And some of the things that we're going to cover today is the perspective from the entrepreneur and also the perspective from the investor and why it's important to understand each other when you're trying to develop funding for your business. One thing I will mention is that as we think about investors, all venture capitalists are investors, but not all investors are venture capitalists. It's really important to understand that differential. Now, when we think about a startup has certain characteristics that are different from just a regular operating business. One is the growth intent. So the intent to really move the business along extraordinarily quickly and raise revenue and frankly not worry that much about making money. The other part is funding sources. So traditionally a lot of people think about banks as a place where they can go and obtain funding. Startups don't have that option because banks, and I have the opportunity to actually sit on a bank board, banks are very, very risk adverse. And in today's environment, they're even more risk adverse. Not only do they want belt and suspenders, but they also want hip waders. They are not willing to take risk on startups. And that really pivots to the level of risk. And one of the things that's important is the level of risk with startups is extraordinarily high. And as a result, the return that's required from investors is also extraordinarily high. A good corollary is credit cards. Credit cards charge a very high interest rate because their risk on collection, because it's unsecured, is much higher than typical bank debt. So the innovator's dilemma. You have this great idea. You are ready to either develop your product. You may be pre-product. You may be pre-software. But you have this incredible idea. But you need money to try and execute it. You need money to hire staff. You need money to manufacture the prototype. the resources you need are seemingly out of reach. And this discussion is going to hopefully show you the ways that you can get to that money. So in comes the venture capitalist. A venture capitalist is someone who takes very, very early business ideas and is willing to support them. And the intent, going back to the growth intent is the critical piece. Venture capitalists are looking to hit home runs and grand slams. We'll talk about one of them in a few minutes, but they are interested in extraordinarily large returns on their investments because they also have a high failure rate. So the entrepreneur, right? This is me, if you will. It's what I love to do. I love to start businesses. I love to run businesses. It's 2 o'clock in the morning rolls around, and I'm down in my office trying to figure out how do I figure out the financing for a new piece of equipment, or how do I modify my pricing model so that I can land this new piece of business without injuring the long-term prospects of the business. I mean, that's what entrepreneurs do. They live, eat, sleep, and breathe their business. Conversely, in the other corner is the venture capitalist. And the venture capitalist, to a certain extent, wants to stay unemotional because they need to make an objective decision. They do not want to get sucked into the passion that the founder may have around the idea that he or she is trying to develop. And so they look at everything with a certain constructive criticism, if you will, and that's really their task. So this is a great example of how a venture capitalist invested relatively early on in a startup. Everybody is familiar with Facebook, and so Peter Thiel, legendary venture capitalist, invested $500,000 for 10% of Facebook. So imputed $5 million valuation for Facebook. So I would ask the question, who won here? Did the venture capitalist win because he was able to sell some years later for 2,000 times his investment? Or did the founder win because he was able to have financing that allowed him to grow the business? And this is the key to venture capital, right? They both won. And that's the key to the success in this kind of a process. It needs to be a mutual win for both the founder or the idea originator and the venture capital firm. And these are really the exceptions, right? So we'll talk about kind of the returns that venture capitalists get and how that works out. But think about the collaboration that must have occurred between these guys to grow Facebook. So the next piece is Silicon Valley is obviously known as a place where ideas are incubated, ideas are developed, ideas are stress tested, and there are many, many success stories, but there are even more failures. And that is, I think, the key to it. This is an environment, startups is an environment where there are lots and lots of efforts and attempts, and some are successful. We hear about them all the time, and then some aren't. And we're going to talk about one in a few minutes that wasn't successful, that recently raised a couple of $2 billion, but quickly closed down. So this is the venture capital power law curve. What this basically reflects is the number of investments that really pay off for venture capitalists. It's not half of them that pay off, half of them actually lose money. So it's this sliver at the top, the 6% or so, that turn into the returns that venture capitalists are looking for. So again, this goes back to the risk profile. Very, very high concentration of risk, but huge rewards. And that's why when you sometimes hear a 10-to-1 ratio of successes to failures, you can understand how when you look at somebody who invested $500,000 and ended up with a $1 billion payday. But I'm sure you guys have friends that will tell you about the stock tip that they bought Beyond Meats at 47, and they sold it at 234, and now it's down around 146. And they're happy to tell you about those successes they've had in the stock market. And there are a lot of business people that will also be happy to tell you about the successes they've had in their businesses. But I think it's also important to talk about some of the failures. And frankly, I find that I learn so much more from my failures than I do from my successes. And I'll share one with you. So a couple of years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, I saw a real challenge in the marketplace, a real problem, where people were unable to get to work for a variety of reasons, whether they had lost their license for whatever reason, whether they didn't have the money to purchase a car, or they didn't have the money to purchase a reliable car. So I saw this in a couple of my businesses. I saw it in my manufacturing business, where we had some folks that they lost their jobs because they weren't able to get to work in a consistent manner. And I also saw it very much in my temporary staffing business, where there were many people that would come in that could only take a position if it were on a bus line. So we started a business called Rides to Work. And Rides to Work was a service that we thought made a lot of sense in helping coordinate people that were already driving to work with people that needed rides. So we could, lay out that Joe lived in Pittston. He drove by Sam's house every day going to the Crestwood Industrial Park, and he could pick him up and get paid for giving that person a ride. And then, of course, Sam would also be getting to work on time. So we developed an app that would coordinate this, very Uber-esque, if you will, and we set some targets. We worked at this for about a year and a half, and we needed to get to about 1,500 users to have sustainability, and we thought finding drivers was going to really be our challenge. But it turned out that we could find drivers, but we couldn't find people that wanted to use the service for rides. So we eventually closed the business down. And so the discipline of saying, gosh, we thought we had a great idea. We thought we could develop this in our region and really solve a community problem. It was a greener solution in that there were fewer cars on the road. And it was also really helped businesses get the talent that they needed. But it didn't work. And so in reflecting back on that opportunity, what I realized was that I just didn't build the right team to execute the strategy that we had. And so sometimes, even if you have a good idea, if you don't build the right team, it can be unsuccessful. So I think it's really important to share kind of where some people win in these venture capital ideas. And I funded that venture myself, but it's, and that was the other piece of discipline that was really important, was I put a budget on how much I was willing to spend or invest in that particular venture. So VCs do the same thing. So these are some different types of venture capital and investors. Oftentimes when we have an idea and we don't have the capital ourselves, we will go to family and friends. And there are some real advantages to family and friends. There are people that know us, they know how passionate we are about our particular idea, but there are also some detriments in that we can have lots of small shareholders, which can create distraction, and they also don't necessarily bring the business capital that you may need to help grow your business. Going back to Facebook for a second, Peter Thiel, one of the things that he really helped Mark Zuckerberg with was creating connections and relationships that allowed Facebook to continue to grow at an astronomical rate. That's where a good venture capitalist or a good investing partner can help you out. So angel investors or family offices, they tend to be willing to invest in businesses in a first round or second round, but usually well after the startup process. They aren't going to necessarily invest pre-seed or seed money as much as a Series A or a Series B. They do bring some advantages, though, because they generally have some business connections, but they generally don't want to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, and that's an important consideration. Venture capitalists, on the other hand, tend to have networks, and they use those networks for the benefit of the businesses they invest in. One of the detriments of venture capitalists is they often bet in the same sector on multiple businesses. So they may be investing in you, and they may also be investing in one of your competitors. And so it's important to understand that, because these venture capitalists do tend to focus on niches, as we'll talk about next. So some of them, some are industry focused. Some venture capitalists are industry focused. Some are more early investors like pre-seed and seed, and others may be series, C through E. So there's more meat on the bone, more certitude around the operations of the business. And then there are some that are more geographically focused. I included this slide, which is just a one-pager that I send out to anybody that will actually take it, because I'm always looking for opportunities as an investor. That's one of the biggest challenges, is trying to figure out how to put capital to work. And so whether it's bankers, whether it's private equity firms may be shedding a unit that doesn't fit with their overall portfolio, whether it's corporations that are looking at carve-outs of divisions that no longer fit. These are the things that I look for when I'm looking for opportunities. So I'm not a pre-seed or a seed guy. I'm much more of a distressed asset, turn it around kind of investor. So so how do you go about getting funding as an entrepreneur? The key really is you need to be an effective salesperson, and you need to be effective at conveying your ideas, and I think Chris said it very well earlier today. You need to be able to successfully distill your ideas down to very, very simple concepts. And you need to also be very good at explaining what problem you are trying to solve in your deck. So I'll give you an example of one where it wasn't so successful, where in my view it was a solution in search of a problem, right? Which is this Quibi that was a 5-minute video platform that received a couple of $1 billion of funding from Hollywood elites and venture capital firms, but after a very short period of time, I think it was even less than a year, closed its doors because TikTok and YouTube continued to have the right position in the marketplace, where this was a solution in search of a problem, and the users didn't view it as a problem. So it brings us to the pitch deck. So addressing the problems of how you are going to fix a challenge in the marketplace is really critical. The key to effectively putting together a pitch deck and also communicating with investors or prospective investors is practice. And what I would encourage you to do is to practice on anybody that will listen and really work to get your spiel down. And I know a lot of folks don't view themselves as salespeople, but if there's one opportunity to really hone your skills, it's in this area. Because as a founder of a business, no one knows the product better or service better. No one is more passionate about it. No one can really understand and explain the subtleties and why it is so different and why it's going to fix the problems in the marketplace. That is the key. So a founder has to be the key to raising money for the business, and you need to figure out how to put that sales hat on so you can go out and raise money. The one thing I will mention is that if you go back to the beginning of this discussion, Businesses fail because they run out of money. It's never, ever too early to start raising money. And remember the first 2 or 3 or 4 times that you go out and you talk to someone about investing in your idea, it's going to be a little lumpy. It's going to be a little challenging. Don't let that get you down. It's one of those things where we've all been there. We've all had those times where we walk out of the meeting and say, oh my gosh, I just did a terrible job and I lost an opportunity. And that's why you want to start with people that are friendlies, if you will, people that are going to cheer for your success, but will also give you some valid feedback so you best understand how you can improve your pitch. There are many pitch decks out there that you can use to model. I think one of the best ones I had seen was Airbnb, or Air Bed and Breakfast is what it was called at the time, and it's just going public. Great pitch deck, identified what the market looked like, identified the challenges of the existing solutions, whether it's hotels, and then also identified how they were going to make money from this particular strategy. And they were obviously successful at raising a large amount of money. So one of the challenges in going to venture capitalists or other investors is they see a lot of deals. They see a lot of opportunities. I belong to a network called YPO. We have a deal network. There are 24,000 members of this network worldwide. The businesses represented in this network have about $4 trillion of GDP. And so this is a very, we see deals coming through the deal network every day, 2, 3, 4 a day. One that I recently looked at that I think is really intriguing is a UK-based business that is figuring out how to use psychedelics for the treatment of depression. And so there's a real groundswell of interest in using this alternative approach which kind of resets the mind, if you will, from a depression perspective. I think it's really interesting because I think mental health in our country, actually in the world, is an incredibly important topic. So that is one that I'm looking at that came across my desk through this deal network. But so we see lots and lots of deals as potential investors. And your job is to work your way through this funnel. One of the things that we often do is we think we have this really, really great idea, so we want to have an NDA put in place. NDAs are okay, and they have their time and place, but they also create friction. So if I have a potential deal and the first thing they want to do is sign an NDA, unless there's something really, really interesting about it, I just don't even go there because there are so many deals that come across the desk. But just something to keep in mind that NDAs sometimes create friction when you're trying to work through, trying to get in front of potential investors. And so really, we get to the beef, right? The old Wendy's commercial, where's the beef? And that is you, right? You're the most important part that investors are looking at, right? They are trying to determine how committed is this individual to this idea. And so I have a slide here, and I have a bit of a metaphor around breakfast. So at breakfast, you have eggs and bacon on the plate, right? And so as I think about it, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. And that's what, as an investor, we look for. We look for the pig that is committed. But let me put that in a real world kind of metaphor. So last October, I made an investment in a 5G business. That business was struggling. It was struggling because of the first thing I said, which was they were running out of money. They were growing quickly, but they weren't able to fund their business. So one of the two founders sold his house, moved his wife and his 2 kids into a mobile home, or a RV, I should say, an RV, and they drove around to visit customers, to continue to sell, those sorts of things. That to me was commitment. And so because of that and how all in I saw this individual being with his business, I decided I would make an investment in that business. And frankly, after 15 months, it appears as though it's working out well because their biggest challenge was having growth capital. They had a great concept, great idea, great service, but they were running out of capital to continue to sustain their business. So that concludes my comments for the day. I have my contact information. If on the last slide, if you as a innovator, a founder, or just a regular business guy like me, my contact information is there. If I could be helpful, I'm always happy to talk to business people about how they can successfully grow their business, overcome the challenges that they have. Oftentimes they are around financing, but sometimes there are other issues. And so consider me a resource and a free resource at that for ideas on financing or on other business problems.
Chris, that was excellent. My phone's blowing up with comments about your pitch. So are you ready for some questions? There are a few
Sure.
in the portal,
Yep.
and then there's a few that you guys can keep sending questions because we've got plenty of time. All right. So our first question, Katie Hester from Wilkes University and Alvernia University in the house, and she's going to start us with a hard one, Chris. Are women represented equally in venture capital and investing?
No, they're not. There's the same kind of disparate representation in venture capital as you see in many other areas. I think there's been certainly progress, and if you look at Silicon Valley, there have been some very successful women like Meg Whitman, but to a large extent, it is representative of the current demographics we see in both the boardroom as well as owners just of regular businesses.
But what's interesting about that is it doesn't mean that they're not capable and don't have the capacity to invest, right?
No, I think that's a great point because clearly there are incredibly successful female founders out there and female venture capitalists. And I do believe there are actually some funds that focus specifically on underserved markets, whether it's female startups or minority startups. So there are some in those niches that I mentioned. There are actually some firms that specifically focus on those, just as there are for green initiatives and some other things.
So listen, Katie, I love that question. Thank you so much. Would you do me a favor, please? Would you create that topic in the portal? Because we have a lot of people who are in the conference who have answers to, if you're interested in investing, here's where you go and here's who you can talk to. So thank you. That was a great question. All right, so Chris, the next one is from Keith Eberts. Keith is from Wilkes-Barre area STEM. And Keith wants to know, back to your point about failure, how do you encourage people that keep failing when they're trying to start a business?
Boy, that's a
great
great question. It really is. And I think having a conviction around your particular passion really helps. But I struggle with that word failure. To me, I think the only way you fail is when you give up. And if you have an idea, just as I mentioned my rides to work, I had an idea. I thought it was a good one. To this day, I still think it was a good one. But I knew that it wasn't going to work the way I'd planned, and maybe I need to revisit it. But the point is that I don't think failure, if you learn from the process, it's not a failure.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, I'm going to go, let's see, what can I pick next? I hope I say this right. Talia from East Stroudsburg. When presenting your pitch to investors, what are some of the biggest do-nots from your perspective?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. So one of the things to not do is to puff too much. In other words, create unrealistic expectations or unrealistic financial models. That does not mean you should not brag. So if you, for example, have a degree from Harvard, an MBA from Harvard, you should make sure that that is something that is communicated. But and if you have had some initial success, you should make sure you communicate that in a very effective way. But creating unrealistic financial models is probably the biggest no-no.
All right, Chris, this one's from Bill Booth, and I encourage people to answer these questions themselves, not just Chris. But from Bill Booth, he says, can you please elaborate on the NDA issue? Actually, can you remind listeners of what an NDA is?
Oh.
And can you please discuss how you manage this delicate balance between an entrepreneur who's concerned about sharing an idea?
That is a terrific question. I'm sorry for the nomenclature. NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. And it is a way to make sure that when you go and you present your idea to someone, they don't take it and try and develop it themselves or have others develop it. It is a very challenging area. I know that there are some very large businesses that have a reputation for doing exactly what I just described, where they will have founders come in, pitch them on their idea, and then 2 years later, those organizations are out there with a competing product or service. And I think that's despicable, frankly, and that's why NDAs are sometimes required. The challenge with NDAs very, very early on is, again, as I mentioned, it creates this friction. And I know you want to protect your ideas, but if you're really able to execute better than others, I would encourage you to understand that you need to communicate your ideas in a clear and concise way, and make sure that you understand the reputation of the people you're pitching to first and foremost. And if they have that reputation for going out behind founders' backs and competing, then I would stay away from them.
All right, Chris, so this one's kind of interesting. We encourage entrepreneurs to be unique and different. And one of the questions out there is, so why do you include your non-career jobs in your bio?
You know, I do that more from a humor perspective. I think that my past has been key to getting me to where I am. I've had some lumpy times in my my business career and my life, and I think those, for example, I learned more by being a trash man through college than I did at college. I learned more about people. I learned more about the challenges people have, and it really helped ground me as to what's really important and why I should really focus on some of the things I focused on. For example, being independent has become incredibly important to me. And so those life experiences, those jobs, those, you know, me washing pots and pans at the Covered Wagon restaurant, it was just an incredibly rich part of my development that I look back upon, and it helps me understand how I connected the dots to kind of move business along.
So Chris, the questions just keep coming. So one from Kings is in the house, Mark Leffler in the back. This one's from Larson Rice. And Larson wants to know, do you have to have a specific background to get into investing, whether that's formal investing from a VC perspective or angel investing for those of us who do that on the side?
Yeah, so terrific question. So there's, I think no. The answer is no. You do not need to have any particular background. As a matter of fact, I think the VCs are much more professional, and I mean that from they have a process, they have a model, they go through things in a certain way. But I think most angel investors and also family offices, the way they've developed their capital is by either having a liquidity event where they had a business that they sold for a large amount of money and they use that to fund this family office, or they're an existing business person and they're trying to figure out how they can deploy their capital. So they tend to be more operator kinds of focused investors rather than the VC, which do tend to be much more this process, if you will, where they grind through lots and lots of these proposals and make investment decisions. And they're much more strategic about it than family offices or individual investors, and clearly much more so than family and friends.
So Chris, we could do this all day. The questions keep coming. So would you be able to jump in the portal after this at some point today and answer some of the questions we don't get to
Sure,
now?
be happy to.
All right, Abington Heights is in the house. Russell Booth says, when do you think it's okay to walk away from your original idea if it's not working? and should you be constantly adapting? So actually, that's not from Russell, that's from Shane, but I'll get to Russell's next. When do you think it's okay to walk away from your original idea if it's not working, and should you be constantly adapting?
Yeah, I think the second piece is constantly adapting is key. Refining ideas, because rarely do we ever come up with the secret sauce the first time. And it takes that constant feedback loop where you're getting, you test things, you try them, they don't succeed, so you try something else, you add to it. That feedback loop is, and I don't think that stops just when you get out of the startup phase. I think that's what you do throughout business. And I think that once you think you know it all, that's when you're in trouble. But to the first part of the question, and you'll probably find this humorous, but I use this metaphor. It's an old Cherokee metaphor, and that is when you're riding a horse and it dies, it's time to get off. And so the key there is to understand when your horse is in duress. And having good discipline around, okay, these are my targets, these are my goals, and if I don't get to these, I need to reassess. And being really programmatic about that and really disciplined, because even though we may think we have a great idea, if the market is telling us something different over a long period of time, we should reassess that.
Okay, so let me do the follow-up from Russell Booth then, because it's sort of a corollary to that. Have you ever had a troubled investment, and can you talk about what it took to actually get out as opposed to figuring you had to get out?
Again, my rides to work experience is one where I just closed it down. I had to let the employees that we hired go, shut down the website, and obviously I had about 24 hours of, gosh, what did I do wrong? But that's what entrepreneurs do. They bounce from those kind of challenges.
Chris, how about one more? What are some common reasons an entrepreneur will be denied funding?
Common reasons would be the financial model doesn't make sense. There doesn't appear to be the passion or the all-in approach to the business idea. For example, if you have somebody that has this business idea, yet they're going to keep their full-time job, that often is a big distraction and detractor from getting funding. If you're going to put your hard-earned money into a deal, you want to make sure that whoever is going to execute that is all in. So those are a couple of reasons why people may walk from, and also track record. I think if you have a track record that shows that you've had 3 or 4 unsuccessful ventures, the likelihood of getting bet on another time is thinner.
So, TechBridge Nation, if you have enjoyed this presentation, the one thing that Chris didn't tell you as part of his remarks is he jumped in on this Friday, when his son-in-law, who was going to do the presentation, had to step back because of a death in the family. And so, Chris, I really want to thank you for being here today, jumping into the portal afterwards, answer some questions, and we're going to take a break here, so we're going to bring up the next set of speakers. We're going to breakout sessions. Jump into your favorite breakout session. We're going to do another one here. There's more to come, so come on back. Thanks.
Thanks, Don.